Been around this church for a long time, you might have recognized two new guys to the band who aren't really new. We just got him back to come and play, so thank you guys for coming back and playing with us today. If you got a Bible, I'm going to ask you to turn to Micah chapter 1. We're going to start looking at the book of Micah. And this is an interesting book. One of the things that we'll see about Micah is that, like what we think of when we think of Old Testament prophets, Micah does spend some time talking about things that are going to happen in the future. Micah does spend some time on what we typically think of as prophecy, which is predicting things out into the future. And we're going to see that. Probably one of the most well-known verse out of Micah comes from chapter 5, verse 2. And that is where we are told that in Bethlehem is where the Messiah will be born. Obviously speaking of something that's going to happen hundreds of years into the future. And so the most famous verse out of Micah is one that fits that predictive prophecy kind of mentality. But it's not my favorite verse out of Micah. My favorite verse out of Micah actually comes, I believe, from chapter 6, verse 8. Where Micah says, "What does the Lord require of you? But to do justly." You know, that verse really sums up what the book of Micah is about. Because Micah spends a lot of his time dealing with injustices within the nations of Israel and Judah. Now, at this point in time, we have to kind of remind ourselves, when we are talking about the time period of Isaiah, or Micah, who is about the same time period as Isaiah, when we begin to talk about them, we have to understand that there are two nations that are Jewish. One is the northern kingdom, called Israel, and the other is the southern kingdom, called Judah. Israel, its capital is Samaria. Judah's capital is Jerusalem. And so as we talk about those, as we read some things in Micah, you'll kind of see that it talks about Samaria and Jerusalem. And remember, those are two different nations. The nation of Israel had split apart and become two. But one of the things as we talk about Micah, it's really, in many ways, it is so appropriate for where we are as a nation and the things that have divided us as a nation. Because in some ways, the book of Micah is about a topic that is so misunderstood now. It's a topic of social justice. Now, some of you probably heard that term and thought, oh my goodness, our pastor's done become a socialist and a liberal, and we're going to have to get rid of him. No, okay? There is a major difference between social justice and what Micah is talking about in terms of that, kind of using that term, and I just can't think of a better term to use, and what so many people today mean when they use that term, social justice. There's a huge gulf between them. There's a chasm between them. For Micah, a social justice is not about giving to those who are not willing to work and making sure that they have everything they need. For Micah, social justice is about making sure that the systems, the government systems, the legal systems, the political systems, the religious systems, making sure that all of those things don't unnecessarily burden those who do not have power. And so it is not providing for the powerless and the defenseless, but it is making sure that the defenseless and the powerless, that they have the ability to take care of themselves. So this isn't socialism where I'm taking your money and giving it to somebody else who's not willing to work. This is the idea of them making sure that everybody has the opportunity and that you don't have the deck stacked against you by the government systems, which is what we're going to read about, is what was happening in the city of Jerusalem and Samaria. Social justice. We don't like that term because of the way it's been used. The book of Micah itself, we're going to just take a minute to kind of some background of this book because we're going to start studying it, and I think it's important for us to kind of have an idea of when it is. Micah is obviously the named prophet of the book. Honestly, we don't know a whole lot about Micah. We know a little bit about where he's from, but we're not told much about him. Why? Because Micah himself is really not that important. Micah recognizes that it's not him that is important, that it is the message that he is proclaiming. Some scholars try to claim that Micah can't be the author of this book because of the time period that he is working in, and when some of these prophecies that he gives that are obviously fulfilled. There are some that try to say Micah can't be the author. The only reason they say that is because they're not willing, scholars are not willing to be able to say that you can predict something and have it actually come true. And so the only argument against Micah as the author is saying that predictive prophecy can't be accepted. Well, if we believe in a God who knows the future, a God who holds the future in his hands, then can we come back and say that we should believe in predictive prophecy? Yes. And so there is no reason to not have Micah, not to claim Micah as the author. He worked in a time period, the same time period at which Isaiah and Hosea ministered. And so if you kind of want to get an idea by reading some of the other prophets that were speaking during this same time period, you can go and read the book of Isaiah, you can read the book of Hosea, and you will see a lot of similarities in some of the things that they're talking about, the themes that they work on. The time period was somewhere between 750 and 686 BC. Yes, that is a long time period. He did not serve, he didn't prophesy during that entire time period, but just based on the names, the kings that were named, he's got to be somewhere during that time period of 750 to 686. He was working in a divided kingdom. The historical context that he was working in, he prophesied during a unique time for both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of Judah. It was a time of economic prosperity for both nations. The economy was doing great. Doesn't that sound familiar? Our economy is booming right now. There is a lot of similarity there. It was also, one difference is this was a time of political stability. The northern kingdom, during most of Micah's prophecy time, the northern kingdom had one long king that reigned for quite a while during that time period before they just kind of fell off a cliff. And the nation of Judah also had a king that reigned for a very long time. But it was a stable time. Primarily it was stable because the surrounding nations and the empires that surround Israel and so often are fighting over control, trying to have control of the nation of Israel, the promised land. There was a time period where all of those empires were kind of at a weak point. They were dealing with things internally, and so they weren't as worried about trying to have control over the nation of Israel and Judah. Some important themes that are in this book. And I would say that probably one of the most important is the abuse of the defenseless. It is a major theme in the book of Micah. We're going to see that. Micah gives comfort to the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable. Micah is one who pronounces judgment on the comfortable. He pronounces judgment on the leaders of the nation. He's saying to them that you are comfortable because you have robbed the poor and the defenseless. Micah talks about God's sovereignty. He teaches us that the God whom we worship is the one who rules this world. Micah also talks about the blessing of the Gentiles. He is one of the first prophets who stresses that one of the responsibilities of the Jewish people was not to be blessed themselves and to focus on their blessing of themselves, but that they were to be a blessing to all the nations. And we see that in the very first verses of Micah. Micah is one who reminds the people of Israel that you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to be a blessing on other people. You are to take what God has given you and that you are to give that out. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But if you've got a Bible, turn to Micah chapter 1. I'm going to start reading in verse 1. We're going to read all of chapter 1 today. The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth during the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. The vision he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. Hear, you peoples, all of you. Listen, earth, and all who live in it, that the sovereign Lord may bear witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. Look, the Lord is coming from his dwelling place. He comes down and treads on the heights of the earth. The mountains melt beneath him, and the valleys split apart, like wax before the fire, like water rushing down a slope. All this is because of Jacob's transgression, because of the sins of the people of Israel. What is Jacob's transgression? Is it not Samaria? What is Judah's high place? Is it not Jerusalem? Therefore I will make Samaria a heap of rubble, a place for planting vineyards. I will pour her stones into the valley and lay bare her foundations. All her idols will be broken to pieces. All her temple gifts will be burned with fire. I will destroy all her images, since she gathered her gifts from the wages of prostitutes. As the wages of prostitutes they will again be used. Because of this I will weep and wail. I will go about barefoot and naked. I will howl like a jackal and moan like an owl. For Samaria's plague is incurable. It has spread to Judah. It has reached the very gate of my people, even to Jerusalem itself. Tell it not in Gath. Weep not at all in Beth Ophrah. Roll in the dust. Pass by naked and in shame, you who live in Shaphan. Those who live in Zaanan will not come out, and Beth Ezel is in mourning. It is no longer protection. Those who live in Marath writhe in pain, waiting for relief, because disaster has come from the Lord, even to the gate of Jerusalem. You who live in Lachish, harness fast horses to the chariot. You are where the daughter of Sin and the daughter of Zion began, for the transgressions of Israel were found in you. Therefore you will give parting gifts to Moresheth Gath. The town of Achzib will prove deceptive to the kings of Israel. It will bring a conqueror against you who live in Mareshah. The nobles of Israel will flee to Adullam. Shave your head in mourning for the children in whom you delight. Make yourself as bald as the vulture, for they will go from you into exile. Pretty depressing passage of Scripture. And Micah says in these verses that he has a message to the nations. From the very beginning, the people of Israel have been given, through Abraham, a call, a challenge to bless all peoples. Unfortunately, Israel neglected that mandate. And the nation had become focused solely on being blessed by God himself instead of being a blessing to other people. But here the call to the nations is given. That they're going to come into Jerusalem to experience blessing. You know, isn't it sad that God is saying to the people of Jerusalem and the people of Israel that instead of you going out and finding those who need to be blessed, that you stayed inside and you said, hey, if you want to be blessed, you have to come here. You have to come to us. We are not willing to go out to you. All we are going to do is sit back and say, if you want to be blessed, come and be blessed with us. That is not what the people of Israel were told. That is not what Abraham was told at the very beginning. That he was to be a blessing. That wherever Abraham went, he was to carry the blessing, and that his people were to carry the blessing with them. Folks, it is still the same with us. You and I have been called by God, not just to be blessed, and we are incredibly blessed as a people, as a church. We are so incredibly blessed. But we have been called to take the blessing that God has given us and to share it beyond our walls. One of the things that we do is God's table. And I love what we do at God's table. I love the fact that we are providing food for those, a home-cooked meal for some people that really just need a home-cooked meal. We provide a place for some ladies to come in and be able to sit down and just share and fellowship together. It is a great ministry. But folks, we need to ask ourselves, what can we do to take a step beyond that? What can we do to help, to serve, to minister to those in our community even better? This past summer, we kind of started taking a step in that direction. We have 3 major offerings that we do as a church every year for missions. We have the one that we're in right now, Mary Hill Davis for Texas Missions. We have the Annie Armstrong we do at Easter for missions in North America. We have the Lottie Moon that we do at Christmas time for missions all over the world. As we talked about it, we recognized that what we didn't have was an offering that was focused on serving and ministering to people right here in Sanger. And so this summer we added them and we raised money. And now what we have to do is figure out how to take those funds that God placed in our care, how to take those and put them into action outside of the walls of this church, how to go out and to serve the people of Sanger. Because the people of Sanger, there is hurt, there's pain. You know, I believe that the 6th grade campus, which is the first time that all of the kids of Sanger schools are in one building, believe that the free and reduced lunch rate is about 50%. What that means that 50% of the kids in Sanger live in a poverty situation. They live in a situation where many times, unfortunately, they are not sure where breakfast, where lunch, where dinner is going to come the next day if they don't get to go to school. They live in a place where they don't have that confidence. We as a church need to ask ourselves, what can we do to help? We'll be talking with the deacons very soon because we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity of an outside organization that wants to be able to do some work in Sanger that we can possibly partner with, and we can do some things to minister to those who need help in our community. We are to be a blessing to those around us. Why? Because God has blessed us so much. That's why Israel was told to be a blessing to other people, is that they were to take the blessing that God had given to them, not just materially, but spiritually, to take the blessing that God had given to them and to share that with other people. That is a job that you and I are to do. We have been blessed by Christ so much. We have been blessed with eternal life. We have been blessed with hope for everything. We have been blessed materially. Our job now is to take that blessing and to share it out. Micah tells the people of Israel that God is watching them. He tells the people of Israel that God is watching in verses 3 and 4. You know, some of our founding fathers had a belief in a system called deism. Deism, the best way to describe it is to use the watchmaker analogy. They had this idea that God was like a watchmaker, that God put the world together and put all of the laws into motion, and then just kind of kicked it out there and said, good luck. You know, the watchmaker makes the watch, puts all of the pieces together, makes sure that everything works, and then the watchmaker sells it. But the watchmaker then is not concerned about the watch after he's sold the watch and gotten rid of it. The watchmaker analogy is that God got everything together in the earth, kind of kicked it out there and said, I'm hands off now. That was some of the founding fathers had that belief in what is called deism. But I want to tell you that is not a biblical doctrine. The Bible tells us that God is watching. In contrast to that unconcerned deity, the Bible clearly shows that God is watching and is intimately concerned with the events of earth and the people that He loves. Verses 3 and 4 is a great picture. It demonstrates God's watch care and concern for His people Israel. It uses terms that describes God in kind of some man type of terms, some human type of terms, to give us an understanding of what this God is like. Its power of presence makes mountains melt. Isn't that awesome to think about? That our God is so powerful that his presence makes the mountains melt. And that God is watching. He was watching the people of Israel. He was watching us. But unfortunately, we have to ask ourselves, what was he watching? What was he seeing? Verse 5 says that what he saw was sin. Micah describes the nation of Israel and Judah using various names. And when we go through the rest of the book of Micah, you're going to see that many times, that you're going to see different names, all referring to the same group of people. You'll see Jacob, Israel, Samaria, Jerusalem. Sometimes the names Samaria and Jerusalem, sometimes they refer to the actual cities themselves. Sometimes they will refer to the nations as their capitals. But Micah describes the reason that God came down in judgment. And it is the sin of Israel and Judah. He says the sin of both nations is their capital cities. That it was kind of the high point of the sin of those nations. The high places that he talks about. Those were sites of idolatrous worship. And Micah locates the epicenter of sin in the ruling cities. If he was speaking about America, he would be speaking of Washington, D.C. He would be saying that Washington, D.C. is the high place of sin in our nation. But we need to understand that when he talks about the rulers, the leaders, it would be easy for us to say, oh, see, he's just talking about the senators, the congressmen, the guys that run the cabinet members. He's just talking about the political leaders. But if you look closely, Micah is not just talking about the political leaders. Micah is talking about the religious leaders. He's talking about the business leaders. And if he were to talk about the city of Sanger, he would be saying the same things, I think. He would be saying that not only are those in places of leadership in our city so often doing wrong and need to change, but he would say that all of us at times are taking advantage of the blessing that we have been given by God, and that we are not taking that blessing and sharing it outward. Unfortunately, sin brings judgment. Verses 6 through 16 tells us that judgment will come and that it will be bad. The last 11 verses describe that coming judgment. For the nation of Israel, the northern kingdom, that judgment came in 721 when Assyria demolished the nation. The prostitution that mentioned here were temple prostitutes. The evil that was found in their religion. The evil that was found in their business affairs. Many other prophets talk about how they had unfair weights, unfair balances. The idea being, if you went to buy grain, they had two weights that they would put. When they were buying grain from you, they had a weight that would go in their favor. But then when they were selling grain to you, they would make sure that it was on their favor again. It was the idea that they were robbing people. But they had everything set up, and if you ever caught them and you took them to the courts, it wouldn't do you any good, because the same guys that had control of the business were good friends with the guys who had control of the legal courts. And then if you wanted to take them into the religious courts to shame them, it didn't do you any good, because the same guys that had control of the business marketplace were friends with the guys in the religious marketplace, and they were friends with the guys in the political. Everything tied in together. Everything was stacked against those at the bottom being able to survive. God says that is not the way we should live. That we should be fair and honest. God doesn't tell us that our job is to feed the defenseless. God tells us that our job is to make sure and give them the opportunity. But we are not supposed to take care of those who are not willing to work. I love what Paul says in 2 Thessalonians. If any man will not work, neither should he eat. It's not that we go out and it's not socialism. It's not taking from those who have and forcibly giving it to those who don't. It is about making sure that society is set in such a way that we all have a chance. But there are some in our society that because of their upbringing, because of the generational poverty in which they've lived, they have no understanding of how to make a life for themselves. Even if you give them the hand up, even if you set the level playing field, there will be some in our society because their parents did not train them in how work ethic. Because they've grown up for generations in a family in which no adults worked. And you might say, well, that's impossible. Man, I've seen them. They live right here in Sanger. The churches that I worked in before, I saw families. We had one family in my first church. We had 4 generations of one family in our church. The youngest was about 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old when we left. Every single member of that family was on SSI, Social Security Disability, even the 5-year-old. Now, how can we expect that 5-year-old to grow up and become a productive member of society if every day when he wakes up, he looks around at the adults in his life, and the adults in his life are not working and letting somebody else provide for them? Everything is stacked against that kid. What we as a church have the responsibility to do, I believe, is to take the message of hope that we have, to work with those who are defenseless, to work with those whom life has kicked down, and to help to train them, teach them, not just feed them, not just give them food, not just give them clothes, but work alongside them, helping them to understand how to live. Folks, that's part of what our job is. And that's what I think Micah is telling us. Micah is challenging us to be the kind of people that lifts up, doesn't give handouts, but lifts people up, helps people to grow and to become what God wants them to be. That's the church He wants us to be. That's what He wants us to do, I believe. We need to share the gospel of Christ. We need us to preach the message of Jesus, that He died for our sins. But folks, there are going to be people that will never listen to us because they are too worried about where they're going to get their next meal. You know that old saying? People don't care. They don't care how much you know until they know, or they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Folks, we've got to demonstrate that we do care. Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, Lord, I thank You for the opportunity that we